This is CRM Audio, the Microsoft Power Platform and Dynamics 365 podcast. This episode is brought to you by Maplytics by Anaugic, the market-leading certified for Dynamics 365 geoanalytical mapping app. Maplytics empowers users with powerful map visualizations and routing capabilities within Dynamics 365 to drive better sales, improve business processes, and engage the right customers at the right time. Find out more at maplytics.com. Welcome to Power Platform Quarantine Audio. I don't remember where I am or what day it is anymore, but I'm glad to be here. And joining me is George Dubinsky, Sean Tabor, and another Sean McNellis from Microsoft, PFE extraordinaire. How you doing? Hey, McNellis, that's your real backyard, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It's beautiful, isn't it? Minneapolis, pretty good for Minneapolis, Minnesota.
It's exactly pretty sweet.
We're testing out some of the new preview features for the Teams team. How about that?
There you go.
Nice. And Sean Tabor, that's not a fake background there. That's your
this is my resplendent nerd cave. All of my toys.
All right, so the big story that everybody is living through right now is the COVID-19 shutdown worldwide. And so Sean McNellis, I was going to say Tabor or McNellis there. So McNellis, how is this impacting what you're doing from the PFE and the broader Microsoft team? I know there's a lot of things going on there.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's been really interesting. As a PFE and the PFE role, generally speaking, generally speaking, we have most people either entirely remote that go on site periodically, or we do have a certain number of PFEs that go on site every single day, like it's their day job with the customer. That's where they work from. For them, there's a big change. For those who travel on a weekly basis, huge change. A lot less miles, but a lot less pollution, and I would argue a whole ton of extra productivity. Mm-hmm. From a company perspective, it's really interesting. People who work from our offices in Redmond now are working at home. So the first 2 weeks were very novel, like, hey, here I am, I'm at home. Isn't this cool? And so people who are used to working in the field, it's like, okay, yeah, that's neat. That's cool. So I think there's an interesting amount of maybe empathy that comes out of this both ways, where people can say, hey, I know what it's like to work from home every day of the week, or, you're going, my favorite observation is, I just go from call to call to call. Mm-hmm. It's crazy. I can't even play, table tennis. So, that's something that I've never had. Well, I've had that experience kind of for a few years in Fargo, but anyway, so I think it's a good level setting of everybody. And for customers too, there's a lot of customers that default to, I have an office, I have a desk, we have a contract, we have a PFE, come on in every day or every week. This is really a forced scenario. And so it's been a little hard at times, but I think a lot of customers have really rolled with it, and it's sort of jumbled up the typical, maybe I don't like how this works, or I don't want to join a web conference. Everybody has to do it. And so now we're all used to it. And so I think it'll drive some interesting new behaviors as we do our service delivery in the future.
It's interesting. I wanted to ask about perception of people working remotely, because one of the things I noticed that one of the pushbacks against working remotely always be from bosses, kind of, I use the term generously, is pushback saying, oh, people would mow their lawn and play with the kids and do some other stuff, and I don't have control over that, and the productivity will drop. And now what we're seeing is that generally people are responsible adults, and when they paid money for doing their work, they actually tend to do their work. The other aspect, obviously, working from home, and I know that because I've been working from kind of remotely, not from home, but as far as customers concerned, I've been working remotely for the past few years, is that you tend, when you work from home, one of the dangers is you actually work much longer hours than you would do otherwise. You don't have a clear distinction. Like right now, we're sharing an office with my wife, and she would stand up at 6 p.m. and say, okay, I'm leaving the office, bye.
It's very true. I moved to a home office and working remotely. Well, almost 10. It'll be 10 years ago in August. Completely remote. My wife and I, and it was a big change. At first, I think I was better at first at breaking away and like, this is my lunch. This is my time. Go on a walk. It is an interesting, there's pluses and minuses on both sides. So I'm not super great at, hey, we don't have much going on. You get stacked up with stuff, and next thing you know, it's 6:30, 7. You take a quick break for dinner, and now I get my son on the virtual classroom for Boy Scouts, and then I turn around and do conference calls because there's another conference call going on talking about whatever. So let's jump in, and everybody kind of knows that. Well, frankly, nobody has a life right now. The secret, I didn't have one before, so this isn't much of a change. but anyway, it's really interesting. There'll be, as there will be books written for decades on this period of time, and I'm sure people are collecting call data and collaboration data, and we'll be looking at that, I think, for really good reasons on what really works, what didn't work, and what can we do that makes sense this way. I think it sort of underscores the importance of physical connections. Hopefully, there's this weird mental component, biological component, where being in the same space with others is absolutely, as you guys know, completely different. Your brain, they've proven it. They put people under scanners and they watch how brains function differently. And I think this underscores the importance of those things. Whereas maybe before it's like, we got video chat. People use that, right? I don't use it, but you could.
I think you just feel guilty about wanting to strangle someone close to you as opposed to your coworker.
Yeah, that could be too. Yeah.
So now, George, you had some things around this topic that were more developer, and we're not. This isn't a developer episode, but you now have your developer moment here to ask your developer questions about GitHub.
Oh, no. We know that, .NET Core is coming and .NET 5 is coming, and we've been poking around with .NET Core alpha release of SDK libraries. But you own kind of on GitHub a set of tools, PFE library, and other like PowerShell library with Ken. So I just wonder, did you have a chance to play with it? And what's your, this morning I read about OData and .NET 5, which is kind of unifying thing coming up, which is currently in alpha, I think. Anyway, what's your perspective? Did you have a chance in this lockdown to play with it? And what's the future for the libraries and how it's going to change things?
Yeah, so a little bit of a chance. I have a coworker, Bob Gittinger, who's also on Twitter and has actually just released a ALM tool for Power BI that we're using on a project. We needed to.
I think George has a Bob Gittinger shirt, don't you? I love Bob Gittinger shirt.
I'm a big fan. I didn't have we pimped Bob for MVP for quite some time, and then he turned around and swallowed the pill. So I didn't know you worked with him. Yeah.
We work together. We share a customer together, so we're working on a health and human service project, and so we've done some experimenting with things like mini custom portals, and he's spent way more time at the controls of the Alpha SDK than I have. I spent a little bit of time looking at it with Matt in Bellevue prior to the whole lockdown, but Bob spent some actual time coding on it, which is pretty cool. One of the really interesting things is you can put it into containers, like a Docker container. You can run it under Linux app service and ship these things completely. And it is really, really cool. And for things like you need antivirus, ClamAV has a Docker container, can run it. And before it would be like, well, how do we broker the connection between here and the VNet? And now it's a container, you put it, you package it up, you deploy it, the two things can talk together. It really opens things up. So I know he's really excited about it. Speaking for myself, I'm excited about it. I think having it capable of running on any platform is really cool, obviously. And I think that unification piece of having all the libraries in there so people aren't going, oh, there's this one thing these two big things that are deal breakers, and now I can't do core. Now we can, with this library, now you're talking V2 functions in Azure. And really from a developer perspective, there's very little change. From my point of view, at least, it's still code. It looks the same. It builds.
Tell it to Colin, who's been busy writing the dependency injections left and right and encapsulating connections and things like that. Colin, the Colin Verminder, he's been doing some open source development on .NET Core as far as CDS connections are concerned and things like that. So
it's really cool when it's more available and we kind of get the namespaces ironed out and some of the details, finer details ironed out. Matt's been, Barber's been just, I think, putting a lot of, him and the team, and more than him, I'm sure, are putting a lot of work into it. And so it's pretty cool. As far as, we'll kind of wait to see what happens with PowerShell. I would not be surprised if we start working towards a first party option there. If not, we'll look to convert it over and make it core capable. I mean, it's used a lot. I think I just saw the other day it's pretty close to 300,000 installations from PowerShell Gallery. So it's used, I think, a lot in ALM pipelines. I know I use it for some of my projects, and we're converting over to the CDS build actions. But anyway, it's really cool to see us going there finally and getting to that direction and seeing the authentication libraries mature a little bit more into MSAL, where hopefully things kind of get vetted out a little bit better. It's a smoother process to get everybody onboarded onto one authentication library. So yeah, it's we'll see. It's
with your
year or two.
Last question, I suppose, with your PFE library, are you looking kind of for the moment where you can just hit compile and it just works, or you actually rewriting parts of the library to take advantage of perhaps different things in core?
For the PFE core library?
Yeah.
The parallelism stuff? Yeah. Good question. I don't know. I think back to when we architected it, myself and a gentleman by the name of Austin Jones, and Austin's in the product team now, working on some really cool projects as well. And it was really around simplifying the connections, simplifying retrieve, abstracting away the stuff that is not super complex, but just there's a lot of moving pieces. So it's easier for people just to say, I've got one of these, create it. Now I want two of them, create them, or 2 million or whatever. I think right now I moved over to Service Client instead of Org Service. So there's a V9 branch on GitHub now with a slightly different naming because Microsoft owns the Microsoft namespace and I'm not the company. So I think it's, I can't remember the name offhand, but we'll have to see how people are continuing to use it or if there's still a need for it. And then we convert it over, and as far as I know, one of the things we wanted to talk about a little bit today was throttles. One of the things you get with Service Client is there is some, at least really rudimentary basic throttle handling within a Service Client. So it has the ability to say, oh, that was an exception because of throttling. You hit an API limit, service protection limit. I'm going to go ahead and pause on that operation for, I think the default is 5 or 10 seconds, and then I'll retry up to 5 times, 10 seconds apart. And these are policies you can change. So that was one of the big reasons I wanted to get that working in the core library, because you're always brushing up against the throttles, if not, slamming into them head first. And I know we wanted to talk a little bit about throttles. There are 2 different types of throttles going on. One is an entitlement throttle. Those aren't fully wired in quite yet. And then there's this idea of a service protection throttle. Service protection is the one you get back, which says, hey, you've done more than N number of seconds within a minute, whatever. You get back some detail about, hey, you're overloading the service. And so those are obviously really important. Fun fact about those, when those service protection throttles went in, we saw a significant increase in service availability and decrease in service outage calls. So it was too easy for a select set of customers that were very busy to negatively impact a scale group or a group of servers that serve up our service. So service protection throttles, which a lot of services have. By us putting that in, I know Charles and the ops team have seen a huge improvement in how the service continues to be resilient and stay online. So
I think that's an important message that a lot of customers don't understand. They think of throttles as people as being limited, and they are, but there's good reason for them. So what you just mentioned is, if we had no throttles, the service would grind to a halt for everybody, basically, right? Because people boot you in. So you have to have a reasonable amount. And working with your team, we've had a customer that has to do a large migration in a short time window or something. They can be raised, right? You can temporarily raise those throttles.
We have been able to manage through exception before, and I believe I'm not speaking too far out of school to say that there's a couple things to keep in mind, and actually this dovetails into one concept I want to make sure we talk about, which is if you're writing an integration, if you're using Kingsway Soft, if you're using the core library, using an application user is important. Eventually, the goal is that we'll have some sort of overcommit or this fuzzy area of, oh, hey, you've been, the way Azure does it, burstable workloads or burstable VMs, maybe this concept of, you've been good here, or you have a very smooth pattern of usage. Now you're going to spike up for a few minutes.
Right.
Let's allow that. And let's not just go hard limit.
That's a good transition point, because that is something that was announced in October, I believe it was, or September actually, but it didn't really sink in because it hasn't been enforced yet. Now it's starting to be enforced, and people like Fast Track are bringing it up on projects. And we still don't have really granular reporting to tell you how many API calls you're using in a day, but it's coming. And once that comes, the expectation is Microsoft is going to start sending people bills when they exceed that limit in some way. That hasn't been clearly communicated yet. But the limits, and see if I get this right. So test me here. It's 20,000 per day per login password user, and then a pool of 100,000 per day for all your application users in kind of a shared pool, because you can create as many application users as you want, so they have this one pool, right? So, and again, I've looked at it, and I've seen some big customers, and at least working with support, we figured out that they're within the limit. But there's some of them that have, like once a month they hit 1 million or more API calls. Then the rest of the month they're under that. So I think that's where some clarification is needed. How is Microsoft monitoring that? Is going to be, you go over by 10% one day every 6 months, you're going to get a whammy, or what?
Okay, so really good question. Again, I just want to underscore two different types of throttles, one being service protection, one being entitlement. Entitlement meaning tokens that you put in the machine, or tokens you're expiring when you're doing a limit. Or
I think Joel couldn't hear you because he's got this big can headphones on, so he couldn't hear you before.
So I just want to make sure that's clear.
And thank you very much.
Because I will tell you the difference between an entitlement, like a resource limit, and a throttle. It makes a lot of sense that that's confusing, right? Because they'll both stop you potentially.
That was a great sense. It makes sense that it's confusing.
Well, it does make sense that it's confusing.
I think we have an episode title.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Look, but step in just a little bit about the throttle limits, which has nothing to do with licensing and users and nothing like that, right? So one thing that didn't stop to amaze me is people saying, because it was free for all, right? So people were abusing probably in some instances, not even intentional, just simply because lazy programming, so to speak, right? So I could do it, so I don't care about quality of my code. I just need to get things on, blah, 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 done. And abusing, basically bashing the service as hard as they could. And people, when Microsoft started introducing these limits, people complain and say, oh, Microsoft, going for money grab. And say, wait a minute, you tell me, show me a single public service, right, that takes customers' money and it's a well-known service that doesn't have those limits. Like every single service I know has some kind of throttling going on. because
you
it's
have to.
impossible to
It's not like
provide.
say I'm going to go to
quality.
Salesforce because their
Yeah.
API limits are higher or less expensive.
Right.
Yeah,
So
Salesforce had it all the time. So I'm just amazed that people, you take this free thing they took for granted, you take it away and say, hey, look, guys, we really need to maintain quality of service. And people start writing, now I have to think when I write code. Damn.
well, I think so. I see both sides of this one really well. I believe, at least. The part we're missing, and Joel hit on it. I think we've all hit on it. The lack of the ability to have insight here. If you can't measure it, you can't improve it.
He's for you, right?
It's
Every
a comment.
API call should return how close am I to the threshold.
Well, and they do for the throttle, for the service protection throttles, they will tell you, you've done this much.
They don't.
Yep, there's a response in Web API. And if you hit for certain throttles, not every single one of them, on the entitlement throttle though, actually for both, not being able to measure it is killer. And so there's a lot of work being done right now by the PPAC team, the admin center team, to add reporting in. And it's unfortunately not super trivial. So it's taking longer than maybe we would want it to. But I mean, that's a mantra from our customers. It's a mantra from our internal field people. And I think people on our product group know that you can't measure it, you can't improve it.
Well, I think the lesson from the team member license is, if you don't really give people clear direction on how to comply with a rule, you can't blame them for not complying with it. Same thing, like flow, for example, Power Automate. When we create a Power Automate flow using the CDS connector, it should tell us this will use X number of API calls, and then show you, like, if you put in a change set, then it will use this many per run or something like that. That's the kind of thing that would be really helpful, because I think it's this unknown quantity. Business likes dependability, especially these days when everything's so undependable. And having the perspective that I could, without trying, get a big bill that I haven't budgeted for scares people, especially with the messaging around citizen developers. Spin up as many CDS environments as you want, have individuals writing flows and Power Apps and things like that. Businesses want to be able to predict or come close to predicting what this is going to cost them, and they don't want to get a surprise bill.
Budgeting is a reality. Yeah, go ahead, Sean.
I had a customer who was really interested in using Power Automate and Canvas apps, and they had over 20,000 team licenses. So the license impact caused us to deviate completely from our design and just change the plan altogether. And it had an impact on a couple of sides. Not only on we had already started going down a path of explaining how these cool new features are going to help them in their business process, which they got excited about. And then we had to rip it away and say, okay, we're going to do something different that still met the objective, but not in the same cool way. Right.
Part of that falls on sales, and we can bash the salespeople now. But
okay,
easy,
great.
I think we've all seen the case where either a partner salesperson or a Microsoft salesperson at the end of the fiscal year overpromises something to get a deal in to meet their number. And I haven't seen that happen a lot, but I have examples of where a person has pushed team members within the last 6 months, knowing that these enforcements were coming. So in that case, that's a hard hurdle to get over. If somebody was told, for example, hey, you can do, back in the Dynamics portals days, you could do a portal for all your people, and then they find out, no, we can't. Because of licenses. So that's not. I was a salesperson, so I can commiserate with salespeople, but I think it's the reality that it is coming, and I think biggest point is just we need more information before we can do that. But with that in mind, we talked about the throttles. Let's throttle back to the throttle conversation and talk a little bit about the APIs. So what are the things you would say, and maybe this applies to throttles too, for a deployment? What are the biggest mistakes you see people make, like developers or integrators or people who configure or build apps, that set them behind the eight ball for the throttles or the limits? Or what should people be doing differently than they generally are now?
So yeah, and maybe even just beyond throttles and limits. But one of the big things, so designing, beginning with the end in mind as far as design goes with deployment, the integrating it into something like Azure DevOps, making it deployable, one-click build and deploy, seems like it's easy to do, but I don't have time right now. It's a little too hard. I don't have the hours. I can go into a story about directly related to some of the COVID stuff, which I'm sure everybody's inundated with, but why that matters. In terms of API throttling, I think when we look at code, the big things to do to prepare for the future are try and optimize what you're connecting for and what you're doing. So time and number of API calls. That's a lot of analysis can go into that. But kind of know what you're getting into. Adequate logging is huge because I think you can tell pretty quickly. And I think once we get our PPAC report for API calls, that will help a lot. Here's the source. Along those lines, app user, create an app, give it credentials. Better yet, use managed identity if you're using Azure. Smash these concepts together and use an application user. So you're using modern authentications. From a security perspective, it's much better. You can rotate passwords. So that will help.
App user stuff. Is there a point of minimal returns that you reach a certain point? Because if you have a shared API pool of 100,000 per day, and you've got busy integrations, then you've got flows using service principals, this all can add up. And if you got this limited pool of 100,000 per day, do you reach a point where it makes sense to start using some regular user accounts in there as well?
So I kind of stick with them. We had some folks, one of the guys is no longer at Microsoft. He moved on to a different company, but his mantra around throttles were always throttles and like using multiple users and that sort of thing is, if it doesn't make sense, it doesn't make sense. I don't, because not everything is fully implemented and we don't have the reporting. That's a really tough question to answer because I'm not a fan of the named user versus app user workaround or multiple users to sort of bypass the throttle, because eventually we sell a license and API calls at a cost. The faster we can make the service, the higher density we can get, the better experience, the more people, the more scale, margins come into place, or probably more accurately, it reduces our costs to get those things out to customers and you get more for your dollar.
Well, I wanted to verify another thing just to make sure my understanding is correct. My understanding is system actions don't count against the API call, and that includes both the Athena export to data lake and the data export service. Is that correct?
Correct. Yep. That's my understanding as well.
Things reporting or integrations that are read heavy. One thing I've started recommending is don't read from the live database. That's probably better for performance reasons anyway, but export either to SQL with DES or to the
data lake,
and then read from there, and then only connect to basically update or write data.
Yeah, and that's a really good pattern to use. I mean, working on a project now where initially the design was get an integration out to a data lake. If Athena lands in that particular environment, then we can use Athena. If not, we'll have to do something else. But get it into the data lake and then put Synapse. So we've been working a little bit with the Synapse product group on on-demand queries as well as SQL Pool. If you're familiar with SQL Data Warehouse in Azure, that Synapse Pools is just Data Warehouse's rename. But the SQL on-demand stuff is really cool. There should be some more features hopefully coming around that to make it easier. But doing your BI, like high-scale BI, very complicated aggregations, or hopefully we get time series data, so append-only immutable storage in data lake, where every time you update, it lays a new version of the record down, and then you can reduce it down for a time series. There's some great BI capabilities that are sort of right under the surface that we're scratching right now. But it helps with API calls. But if you're looking to do high scale reporting, using Athena into a data lake and figuring that out early helps with the API calls, but it will also help in terms of what you can do with Power BI or whatever reporting solution you want, be it Snowflake or anything else.
How does dual write impact this now that that's generally available for people that have F&O and what we used to call CE, which we don't know what to call it now,
CDS, finance.
How does dual write, if I have my data going near real time from F&O into CDS, is that counted as a system action, or does that count against my API limits?
That is a fantastic question, and I don't know the answer to it because that
politician answer there.
Yeah. Well, I literally had not thought of that scenario. I thought I had most of the first party scenarios, but that is one that I don't know. So we'll have to get back to that one.
If hopefully it's set up in a way, because it's more of a system platform function.
Right.
If you have an F&O integration that's using SSIS or something like that, if you can move that to there, but also virtual entities, is another thing that are getting more powerful now as well. I can imagine that's also a good way to limit the number of reads and writes directly to CDS as well.
It could be, virtual entities. Yeah. I'm trying to think of a scenario where that would work real well. I mean, it's scenario specific. Right. And I'm not trying to speak for anybody on the COG side, like cost of goods side, or on Charles's team. But I think what's happening as we get the reporting up and we discover more and more scenarios, we are working with that team, the team I work on, with the fast track team and others, to try and make sure we're surfacing as many common customer scenarios. At the end of the day, I think what's really important to know is that over 95% of the customers, the throttles weren't just randomly picked out of thin air. They did a lot of discovery on the majority, and I mean the large, not just your 80-20 majority, like 95+% don't even come anywhere near. That's great news, but I know all three of us on the phone call work with a lot of customers that are in that top 1%, if not the top, certainly the top 5 most of the time.
I've heard that some of the people that are the biggest offenders are some of the smaller customers. I've heard stories of 5 user deployments with petabytes of data and things like that.
I have heard similar things where there are a couple where it was actually really kind of unclear. Was it a runaway situation that just left running? There have been. I have heard the same thing. I've heard there's been a couple of those out there, and I don't think on the big customer side, I don't think anybody's abusing. It's, I think George made a really good point. You just don't know. And then again, it comes back to reporting, but it also comes back to our APIs. Maybe there's a more efficient way for us. And that's what I think this will drive long-term, is putting some limits out there. We'll probably adjust those limits, like we have the throttles, like we have other things. We'll probably find that right balance where it makes sense. And then the other thing is too, if everybody has a scenario where I'm making this call, this update, or I'm downloading data from my instance, and that takes a ton of API calls, and it's bad for you, Microsoft, it's bad for me, it's expensive, that's a really, in my opinion, comes down to a pretty easy feature to go, this is worth it. Maybe over the next semester, we look at offering a new API call for this. We offer a new service, and we kind of use that as a mechanism to say, this is worth it for us. It's worth it for the customer. That kind of discussion happens today already. Look, everybody's doing it this way. Can't be wrong. So is it bad guidance? Do we give new guidance? Do we offer a new API? Do we, which is awesome. I think that people are shedding that thing of, we said it this way 6 years ago, so that's the way you have to do it. And now it's, wait a minute, why is everybody doing it this way? How do we address this in a way where hopefully we can improve the service, improve what people are doing, lower the API calls? Because and again, I mentioned it briefly before, but if it costs our company less to host it, less resources, that means we get more density. We can give you more performance, better speed, more API calls for the same amount of money, hypothetically, right? Or offer different features. So, and that, that isn't just this should happen, that those conversations do happen. And so this is just an evolution of that. And And it is really interesting to see now that Charles has spent, I mean, I don't know, what has it been, 2 years, maybe a little more, on fundamentals. You guys have heard it, right? Yeah. There's been a ton of fundamentals work. And, I just emailed a product team guy the other night and said, I know I don't say this enough, but thank you so much, because they are really doing a lot of great work. And nobody can do everything 100% perfect, but man, is the culture and the approach has changed significantly. I showed a customer once the number of updates that go through on an environment. This is the type of updating we're doing. He's like, what? We didn't even know that. So you mean we're getting an update at least once a week? Absolutely. And they were the customer that used to call me on every update.
The solution manager, and see all the patch solutions and all that you don't even notice go in there. It's amazing. But along with the limits, there are 3 kind of big things kind of going down now, or will be by the end of the year. Most of those have been delayed because of Microsoft decided that this isn't the time to spring changes on people. Yep. But you talk about shutting off the classic UI. You talk about enforcing the team member licenses and the capacity storage change everybody's seeing when they go there. Those are a lot of kind of fundamental big changes that people are seeing this year. What's your perspective on that from the PFE side? What conversations are you having with customers? What are you hearing from them?
Yeah, change is hard. It's hard.
Yeah. Okay, my question, Bill.
we had a customer who hasn't moved to unified interface yet. This was several months ago, and we reminded them that it was coming in October at the time, and they said, oh no, we have it scheduled. We have it scheduled when we're moving. And I said, okay, well, when are you looking? He goes, October. I said, you're cutting it a little close. And so I'm sure they were very happy about the December move.
But I was wondering, the one thing I wanted to ask about all these changes and kind of about all these throttle limits. They affect to a certain degree uptime, right? And I remember a few years back, we've been in this war room where all the uptime is monitored, and I'm sure you're a frequent visitor to that room. And I've been wondering, in the current climate, how's that going? How people actually provide support, first line of support, because they do need this humongous monitor on the wall, right?
Yeah.
So how's that working?
So you mean especially with the people working from home, right? So,
yeah.
A lot of that work has now gone to transition into the development teams, quite frankly, meaning they are responsible for their own queues as calls come in. There is some service operators that work just on having access to services and elevated access, but the team has gone from when you guys saw the operations center. The team has changed significantly since then in terms of really adopting true to heart the DevOps model. And there are some really good things with that, and there are some negatives. But because of that, a lot of the devs are on call and they trade shifts, and a lot of times they're working from home. So I have not noticed from my perspective or customer's perspective, a difference in their ability to respond or handle this, which is just really, thinking about it right now, is pretty remarkable. In general, things have gone very smooth from that perspective. I haven't noticed much of a difference. Pivoting a little bit on that, though, I mean, a couple things I want to mention, and we didn't mention at the top, but Microsoft, for anybody that's interested, if you just search Microsoft and COVID-19, there's a news article page that kind of lists Microsoft's response and what we are offering with gratuitous licensing or services and that sort of thing, depending on what kind of company you are, depending if you want to use Teams or not. There's different entitlements that go for a certain number of months or what have you. And if you're a larger customer working with your account team on, hey, what can you do for me? There are things like, even if Teams is completely free for you, maybe you want fast track assistance and you got to get on, let's say 1,000 users in classrooms onboarded the Teams. I work with other PFEs in Texas, a couple of them, and They were literally onboarding thousands of people every single day of the week.
From Zoom to Teams,
for classrooms. What's that?
From Zoom to Teams.
Well, now maybe. Before it was, I mean, sometimes from nothing to Teams, because they didn't have my kids' school. Luckily, had a very good distance learning program already in place, and they just activated it, so we didn't need a lot of the extra time, which is really cool. The other thing is, though, too, I mentioned that with Bob and I working on this health and human services customer, they have a clinic-based business. You have to go in and see them to interact with them in these several states and a couple of Indian nations. And I tell you what, we've been working with them nonstop the past 4 weeks now. I said 3 before, but it's been 4, I guess. And it has been amazing and a lot of work, right? Adopting hundreds of thousands of text messages to blast out to people to tell them new processes. We have people that work in clinics that are now working from home, or they go into the clinic and then they're converting into drive up, because you can do things online, but taking that maybe 20 minutes or 30 minutes or even an hour sometimes of a clinic, filling out paperwork and stuff, a lot of that we've been able to last minute, low turnaround, to put it out digitally. So someone can call up the clinic, hey, can you help me out? They shoot a text over to that person. They can sign up. They can enter in their information, take a picture, sign on their phone. These are all kind of table stakes with most companies, but that hasn't been a need because you have this physical presence. It's those types of businesses and companies where a lot is happening. It takes a lot of effort, but I want to work back into that ALM suggestion when you said, what can you do today to set yourself up better? We've gone from a release maybe once every 3 to 4 months with this group. It's a lot to move into sometimes releasing twice in a week. Wow. And luckily, we've got some people involved that are really big on, let's make sure we've got ALM going. Let's make sure we're doing things repeatably. All of those seeds that are planted are coming back, and we're able to harvest that now. And anyway, it's been really interesting, because when you're in a room of people that say, or a virtual room of people that say, we only release every 3 to 4 months because we need 6 weeks of UAT and blah, 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 blah. And you go, can we get weekly or daily releases? And everybody puts on mute and laughs like, are you kidding me? That's impossible. And all of a sudden now something like this happens, and it's like, we can't let people in the clinic. It might be, we don't even know, it might be health hazard, but we need to help them. They have to eat, or they have to, and it's like, guess what? We're doing daily releases, and that can be a 24-hour day or a 5-hour day.
Or a bunch of times now, what drives your digital transformation, your CEO or COVID?
Right.
This is pushing a lot of things. I've been wanting, like, call centers and customer service. There were a lot of customers that had on-premise call centers and things like that. And I'm wondering, how are they all transitioning? I know we've done some work with that, but imagine if you had 100 people in a call center, and now they can't come in, but you need to keep taking calls. That's an immediate need to change to a different approach.
Yeah, and if you don't have an investment in soft phones and things like that, it's a tough transition. Transition.
The same customer, they have a larger, not huge, but largish call center, large enough. They have access to the system we're hosting, but the phone bit was like, there was a huge scramble. What are we going to do? We looked at Teams. We looked at everything is on the table, right? That's the other thing, the culture of the company being different. It's like, okay, if Teams not going to work because it's not in the zone, what will? Mm-hmm. And as it turns out, they were able to work with their telephony provider, and I think we've got a solution for them. But the acrobatics that are going in to make this, to decouple things that have always been tightly coupled, not because they need to be, but just because it's easier to leave it that way, is really interesting. And I often wonder, like with GDPR, it forced changes within Microsoft that we didn't even know we could make in such short periods of time. Tons of amazing, like, stuff that'll blow your mind in terms of, you can't delete out of that. It's not possible. Well, guess what? We have 30 days.
Delete audit trails and change disabled user records.
Yeah, or think bigger services within Microsoft, like telemetry services and stuff where not because of negligent, it just was never like designed for that. And what was interesting about that, anyway, getting away from the specific stories, is that was done in an incredibly short period of time. And I think it reset the bar in terms of, okay, we can do this if we need to. And so when things like Jedi comes up, we can do this if we need to. Things like COVID, those trials that we've been through have really pushed, teams being there and being more decoupled between the service layers so that we can scale, tens of times higher than what we were, scaling. And so it's just really unbelievable. But I wonder in the marketplace if this sets a new bar in terms of we need to get going quickly. And let me tie it back to Power Platform. We need to get going quickly before you'd go, let's do low code, no code, flow, blah, 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 blah. We'll put this together. And they go, well, we don't have to do that. I wonder if this maybe changes the attitude a little bit and you go, well, we can decouple away from this here and let's do something quick. Let's roll it out there because we know that we have a more resilient business. It'll be incredibly interesting over the next 6 months, but even the next year and a half to see how this impacts customer thinking, and what they're willing to do. Not because they're pushed, but maybe it doesn't matter as much anymore, and maybe they're less tied into it has to be this way because it's always been this way. And this gives us a new thing to really think about. How do we be nimble? And that could be standing up a new call center in a new location, or that could be a lockdown like this, or it to me it's a terrible thing, but hopefully one of the outcomes we get is a really good way to architecturally approach these things and talk to customers more honestly about what can happen and how to enable them, because this stuff does matter. Companies that had that VoIP platform, even if they weren't using it, turn it on, bang, now you're using it. If you didn't have that before, that could set you back 3-4 weeks, contracts. So yeah, I know this is more of the same. I'm sure everybody who's listening to this or you guys have been through this, but it's fascinating for me to sit and think about.
Well, the interesting thing to me is with all the colleges closed and high schools, kids working from home, they're all using Teams or Zoom or some kind of meeting like this. This is giving them exposure to this technology, so they're going to be the people coming to the workforce next, and this is now part of their lives. I mean, my 5th grade son is getting on Zoom meetings every week, and it's like he would have never done that before for any reason.
Yeah,
so, it's interesting. So one thing that I always used to ask you or Sean Deacon when I would see you at Convergence or whatever, that I'd love to get your take on now. I would always ask you, what's the top things you're getting that support is getting calls about? And it was always Outlook client or Dynamics Mobile. Those two things. So I'm curious, how has that changed? Like, what are some of the top things that that support tickets are logged about these days?
That's a really good question. So being more decoupled from the direct like phone support team, I don't have a great sense of it. I probably should have looked into that. It's been kind of a busy few weeks, but I don't know like the top call drivers per se. I will say like server-side sync, Outlook add-in configuration always is a call driver. And the beauty is it's not because the COM add-in crashed or didn't load. It's other stuff now. Like how do we configure the right sync? What's the best way to roll this out? So it's changed the conversation there a little bit.
Or like if you stop syncing a contact, then you want to sync it again. That's always the tough one.
Yeah, that, and then certain things with appointments and delegates, and and I will say I can foresee that being a little bit more of a call driver now too, because we have an announced deprecation of the actual COM add-in, and now people are also moving to that actively where maybe they hadn't had that before in some cases. So I think there's some more questions around that.
Well, and if the Power Apps people ever fully wake up that this capability is there and start using it, that would really blow that up too, because I think generally people I see with Power Apps are having emails sent via the Outlook connector or something, haven't really woken up that, hey, we got this email activity inside CDS. So
right. Yeah. So I think that's one. The other one is I know for our team, talking about UCI, the UCI scenarios, covering the gaps, if there are any, or this is one of those valid. It might not do that one thing, but it's still, you still get the outcome. It's a different way to do it. There are still, in my opinion, there's still a couple gaps there I'm sure they'll be out before October or October 1st. But
it's not like I'm not seeing showstopper stuff with UCI anymore.
Nope.
I am seeing
really.
It's quirks where why don't we have the view related records drop down on this form, but we have it over here. That's the thing.
Yeah, and the biggest headache is, in my opinion, just these more complicated customers, getting them moved over. It's just a hurdle, and there are sins of the past that have to be dealt with now. But working with a very large customer, we're going to UCI. We're setting our sights on September. Even with the delay, I think we can make it work. But we're moving from legacy to UCI, and they were still using IE, and there was a couple of services they had bought that required that and hadn't been updated, and so it's like just going to UCI isn't that big of a deal, but dealing with CORS issues or getting these services updated, and it's not necessarily a huge project in many cases. Sometimes it is.
IE isn't the browser that gets the bulk of the testing now too. So if you're going to have an issue, it's probably going to be an IE user, not a Chrome user.
Yeah. So what we're doing right now is we're decoupling from IE in the legacy web client. And then as soon as we get that nailed down and we have people onboarded, we're rolling out Edge, the new Edge for everybody. Once that happens, then it's UCI time, and then move from there just to get off of IE.
Customers, the bigger ones going to IE, sticking with one main model-driven app, or are people adopting the micro app strategy?
It's kind of a mixed bag. I believe in the case of this one customer, the one who's on IE, and they're minority. Not a lot of customers are still on IE, but that will probably go with the app strategy because it makes a lot of sense. And as you folks know, if you're moving horizontally across what you're doing, having one larger app makes a lot more sense. If you have an X department and a Y department and a Z department, and they don't really cross that much, then you get a lot more flexibility with multiple apps.
If it's one main process, users don't like to switch between different apps.
Yes.
But you could have one main app, and I'm seeing people do helper apps or scenario specific apps. Sometimes they're Canvas, sometimes model. But like if you have this one thing you do every 3 months, have a unique app for it. But if it's sales and customer service and they cross pollinate each other, then one app still makes sense, I think.
Similar. Yeah. I mean, it's not much different than how you look at things like multiple forms versus single forms. It is different, but it's the same type of thing where if you have all this crossover, you kind of need things in one spot. If it has discrete boundaries, then it makes more sense. Where things are really interesting, I think, is retail and frontline workers. If you have like 3 different concepts and maybe they do all 3, you might have like a landing page that they go to and you have URLs to each app. I have seen that. Like, imagine if you're a gym or something and you might have personal training and you've got like scheduling and new memberships. It would make sense, like I think from a business point of view, to say we've got 3 discrete apps, and when a person logs in, they see that homepage and they click on that, whether it's our homepage or it's one that they do. But that way it's like I'm doing personal training. Boom, I'm in there. I'm doing personal training. I need to sell a membership. Go home, go back here, and I have a different experience. That kind of thing is pretty interesting, and I think apps actually work pretty well that way.
So are you recommending this is something we've had a debate kind of internally about for some people. Are you recommending people build on the hubs like Sales Hub or Customer Service Hub, or they set up custom model-driven apps? And the reason I ask that is the product teams are building the settings for those into the hubs now. So like the sales features to convert Word documents to PDF, or the SLA and queue settings, those are in the settings of those hubs. And there's also, they've added some functionality that only works in the hub and doesn't work in custom model-driven apps.
Right, like the service configuration settings.
Yeah,
things like that.
So I'm kind of torn because old Joel would say you should create your own model app because Microsoft is going to pass an update and screw your app up or something. And but then we don't do that for field service or marketing. So I'm kind of turning around to say, let's use the hubs. I was curious what your thought was.
If it's pretty cut and dried, I go the hub route. A lot of the customers I've been working with are really a mixed bag and mashup of various entities and legacy app. They will go into a custom app initially. What I've seen or heard some customers talking about is they're going to bring forward their deployment, but then they're going to stand up. Let's say they're very service oriented, or it's for a business group, and then they want to roll it out for global sales. They'll use the sales hub to roll in the new users, because there's this really interesting thing, and a lot of companies are finally, they're getting on board with it. I guess they have been on board in the past, but it doesn't come out that way, which is let's stay as out of the box as we can. And the UCI upgrade is a firm reminder of that. Now, we all know, being around the product for so long, like you had to do something. You couldn't just say, well, I can't do it. But that there is more of a app, people are more apt and businesses are more apt to say, it's sales. Let's just start with a base. What does that look like? It's not super yet. The smaller the customer or the less complicated, a lot of times they go, just show me what the regular sales thing is. Can we tweak this? Can we tweak that? So I don't know. I look at, how well does it fit? If it fits pretty darn good and we can just layer a little bit on top of it, seems like a slam dunk. If it is totally different, or they're coming from legacy where it's all mashed into one and there isn't a good fitment, to me, it seems to make sense to go through custom. And that's the thing, like a net new customer is I would think very differently for a brand new customer to the platform than I would someone who's upgrading. And that's, as you guys know, that's kind of tough on the head, right? Because you're constantly thinking in one mode, and then someone goes, can we do? Well, yeah, you could do. Oh, wait a minute, you're starting new. Let's go here first,
It's a challenge for somebody who's been doing it. They have this big monolithic app that they have to move away from, and then they have to move their team members over here now. So my biggest wish is in this area is the ability to save as a model-driven app, because everything else, including Canvas apps, including forms, including business process flows, including all this stuff, you can take what Microsoft gives you, save a copy, edit the copy, and then you're safe. And we really need that, I think, with apps to give me the ability to, I'm licensed for sales, give me the ability to save the sales hub, to make Joel's super duper sales hub, change it the way I want, leave the original one kind of pristine as it is as a reference, and then good to go.
No, that's a really good idea. And it's interesting how this bumps up awfully close to solutions versus apps, right? And what is the difference? How does this work? And there is a lot of effort between now and this fall, and probably this time next year, of let's make sure the experience of putting an app together is get the best of the old thing, because there still are some really great things about the old app and solution editor that need to come forward, and they will. Let people worry less.
Status reasons, for example.
That might be one of them. I'm thinking more like the navigation piece, but there's get those components that are really making the old thing, which is not optimal, making it sticky. I don't like that, but I like going to the old one better. Me specifically because of the navigation, not because I know it, but to me it just makes sense. Like, here's a bucket, expand the bucket, and that now I don't have to type what I'm looking for. So that's something that'll be coming forward. And then when you're in Make, I want to make stuff. If we're going to put all of it into the portal, so unification of things like, is this form bound to an entity or not? Canvas versus model, rather than starting off, I know what I need to do. Why not open it up, let people start building it? For prototyping and really setting down that base layer, figuring things out, that's going to help remove some of those concerns that are not on purpose, but they are artificial-ish, right? They're there and they could be gotten rid of, and the team is working really hard to get rid of those things and those boundaries. So it'll be, I'm really interested to see all that work and effort in the fundamentals category. Now that those things are really stitched up much nicer, and there's still work to be done, but it's getting done. You have this monumentous amount of effort that gets put on things like dev teams handling those whether they're bugs or design changes that come in, but then also now being more nimble and having a better strategy of how we do release and servicing the stuff that we'll be able to get out over the next year. I'm really excited to see. And we do work as closely as we can with those teams, and so it's great when they reach out and we get to share things. Like, I'm sure you guys are all in contact too, between the DL and other connections. The response there is much better than it was, say, 3-4 years ago or 5 years ago, and more work is getting done faster, and I think at a way higher quality. And a lot of that has to do with you're putting out smaller things faster, and I think the fundamentals being better really drives to a better quality bar. So there's always work to be done, but I am just hugely impressed. I'm really happy with how things are turning out.
What do you think, Tabor? Should we let George ask another developer question before we?
I think we can.
He's jonesing for a dev question.
He's been good. He's been quiet. Please, George.
I don't have any developers question, but I have a suggestion for teams for the backgrounds. Can we have Sean McNellis hair as an option? So I can put it on.
Just put it right on there.
So
yep.
Anybody listening, there you can download a desktop Snapchat camera, and it layers over the top of your camera, and you can put images and hair and glasses, and that can be your camera through Teams. So I don't have it on this computer, but
apparently it blows CPU out of the water completely.
Oh, it's killer. Yeah. Plug in, because that sucker will rip your battery apart. Yeah.
But the robot had it pretty cool.
What wouldn't you do for a good hair? Yeah.
Well, that's my favorite thing to do, is jump on with the state director somewhere, as my head expressed as a roll of toilet paper,
Yeah, there's one of them that will show like double view, then 4 view, then 8 of you, and you go pretty high, like till there's 30 view. I've been using that sometimes, and just during the call,
incrementing it.
There's 2 of me, and then there's 4 of me. It's like I'm multiplying during the call. It's awesome.
Excellent.
And I love people turning on their webcam and seeing that they're in their bratty t-shirt and stuff like that. That's been the biggest thing to me, to be on calls where the vice president from the company's on, and he's wearing a t-shirt that obviously has been around for many years.
Oh yeah,
has a hole in it and stuff.
You're like, you make more money than that. You can afford to at least go with a polo.
And
I wonder,
Microsoft, you can see how long the beard has gotten.
Yeah.
I hear Purva Patel is giving Santa Claus a run for his money these days. That's why.
Is that his thing? He's not going to shave until he's out of quarantine.
I just wonder, guys, do you see people using quarantine as an excuse to be sloppy in their work? Because now we all have excuse. I mean, given people are more forgiven, like my customers definitely leave a bit more room for the sleep deadlines and things like that. And we try not to abuse this goodwill. But I wonder if you've seen the cases where people kind of start abusing this goodwill.
As of right now, I've seen the
guy right now. If I lose any deals, I'm blaming COVID for it, whether it was COVID or not. They aren't going to do it because of COVID,
I would say from a delivery standpoint, I'm not seeing that. If anything, it's the customer gets the concept of, well, you're not traveling, you're available, so you should be able to do what I need you to do. And for all intents and purposes, I mean, that's true. So we're actually getting more work. At least my projects, I'm getting more work because of it.
Yeah, and I think, and I guess my case might be a little bit different. There's several of us that work with government customers or working on task forces for, drive up testing and stuff. And so this is the busiest by far I have been in 16 years at the company. We've been through some really busy we've been through some slow times, but we've been through some really busy times, and this beats it 100 times. It seems like, and I thank goodness my wife is much with her job able to decouple a little bit more from calls and help coach the kids and stuff, and so she's been able to kind of be teacher and full-time remote worker, and so but by far the customers have been very forgiving, and I do think in some cases we're happy to over deliver, if you want to call it that. It sounds weird, but
I do. Look, I experienced it firsthand because before, when customer calls, I'd be like, I'm sorry, I already left the office. So can we do it tomorrow? And customer, yeah, okay, yeah, fair enough. And now they're more like, I know you there. I know you.
You're welcome. I called you. You have something to do now.
Well, thanks, Sean McNellis and Sean Tabor. But thanks, Sean, for joining us again. And you're always welcome back here. This is always informative to talk to you and find out what's really going on with the PFE team. And
yeah, well, next time maybe we can bring Deacon with, and we can really confuse people. Or Sean Nolf. Sean Nolf is also a PFE now. So
let's get as many Seans as we can. I think that'd be fantastic.
We really should.
Every spelling.
That's right.
And maybe Shan MacArthur for the sake of it,
just to screw it all up.
Just to screw.
my current project, the CSP is named Sean. There's a consultant named Sean, and I'm the architect. So it's a good time.
All three of the groups at my wedding were named John. That was really easy because it said, "Hey John," and they all like turn around.
Nice.
Well, a pleasure to be here. Thank you. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it, and stay safe. And hopefully we'll kind of work our way through this here in short order, and everything will be better than the worst case scenario. So we can hope.
Absolutely. Stay safe, guys.
Join us next time.
Bye. Thanks.